Okay. So, the next, now, any last thoughts or questions about Unit 3, about the wilderness? It will resurface in the prophets. The prophet Hosea, in particular, builds his outlook about seeing the time in the wilderness as a honeymoon and hearkening Israel to go back to that time. So, Sinai, here goes, part 2. The Sinai covenant stands at the center of the book of Exodus and is pivotal, right up there with the crossing of the Red Sea, as moments in the formation of the people. This inaugurates, so if the first theme was testing and trial, this theme is covenant. Again, berith. Berith. If you speak to Jewish people today, you will hear the word beris. Beris. That's how it's pronounced in American English. Vowel or consonants change. Bris is, so when a Jewish family takes their boys to be circumcised, that's a bris. It's joining them to the covenant, but it's the same root. So I'm going to say berith, but you'll get that bris in Jewish, modern Jewish parlance. Okay? So the Jews, the Hebrews, arrive at Sinai at chapter 19, verse 1. And they will not break camp from Sinai until the book of Numbers, chapter 10. It's 9 months 9 or 10 months that they spend there. It is the central story or narrative moment of the book. A collection of erstwhile slaves becomes a community to which God binds himself to be their people by way of a covenant. I'm sorry, the markers here are somewhat faded. I'll explain what you got here, then I'll spin this for you to see it, and I'll spin it for you to see it. It's kind of an outline of the text. We have 3 pieces of narrative. Chapter 19, a few verses of narrative in chapter 20, and then the great covenant making itself, 24. And then you have 2 blocks, square blocks of law. On the handout I gave you, it's kind of a mishmash of various things. Here you see a list of all the law codes.
Handout? Handout?
Oh, I knew I had too many left over. They're invisible. Only nice people can see them. All right. So what you have in the upper right-hand corner is a list of the legal material in the Pentateuch. So these are separate collections of law. When in the New Testament Jesus talks about the law, he means all of this. When you hear people say there are 612 laws in the Old Testament, this is what they mean. These collections are the law code. Anybody else didn't get one that I overlooked when I was handing these out? Okay. So we're going to return to law several times together. So we have the Decalogue, which I hope most of you recognize that word. It's Greek. Deca is 10. Logos is word. In this case, it means rule. The Decalogue are the 10 words. The 10 words. That's how in the Jewish mind they're called. These are called the 10 words, the 10 commandments. They are unmediated. They were unmediated. God gives them to the people directly. It makes their ears bleed. And so they say, Moses, you talk to God. He scares us. But the 10 commandments come from God directly. Unmediated God speech. The second big block is called the covenant code. On your little sheet there, it's chapter 20, verse 22 to 23, verse 33. And these are mediated. Moses goes up to Sinai, and God lays them on Moses, and Moses comes down and gives them to the people. So there's 2 kinds of law that we're going to look at in this one setting. Law that comes directly from God. It's mainly apodictic, which means do it, darn it. Okay? Thou shalt not. That's apodictic. A-P-O-D-I-C-T-I-C. Apodictic. There is apodictic law in the covenant code, but the covenant code is primarily causal. When this happens this way, then you do this to them. Okay? So when you accidentally let your ox gore your neighbor, well, then this was what happens to you. Okay? So it's causal. It's based on the causal, where the apodictic just says don't or do. Okay? So, and then you have, over the top here, you have, in purple, a theophany. That's a word that we're going to throw around a lot in the Old Testament in particular. The Greek word for God is theos. And phoneo is to show or demonstrate. A theophany is when God shows up. Okay? So a theophany is an appearance by God. So I'm going to spin this now. Hope you can see. Some of it's kind of faded. You have 3 blocks of narrative. You have 2 squares of law. Okay? You have the first, the 10 Commandments, unmediated, coming from God directly. Then the covenant code, mediated through Moses. And then 2 theophanies, one in chapter 19 and 20, and then one in 24. Okay? So that's the overarching shape of the text we're going to look at in this session. Okay? Questions so far? Yes, sir.
Is this sometimes referred to as Mosaic law?
All of it is Mosaic law. Yep. All of it is because Moses is there. The Mosaic law. We Christians just often call these 5 books the law because, again, it appears so in the New Testament. But there's a lot of different stuff in the Pentateuch, only some of which is law. Okay? So, in the Torah, there are a series of different law codes. We're going to look at the Decalogue, and we're going to look at the Covenant Code. On the back of the handout that most of you got is also a series of citations from the Law Code of Hammurabi, who maybe you learned about briefly in like 6th or 7th grade. Hammurabi is a Babylonian ruler who is credited with posting law on a public spot, and so he becomes famous for that. And you're going to see a lot of transference, a lot of similarity. In fact, sometimes word for word between the law that Moses brings and this tradition, because it's part of the common ancient Near Eastern body of rules. Okay, so the law seems like a hodgepodge, but believe me, there really is an order to it. We'll see. There is actually, it's been organized in a certain way. So be patient, and we'll get to that, and it will maybe make more sense. We don't know, again, let me reiterate, we don't know where Sinai was. Open your map books, your atlases. Can I overlook your shoulder here, Shirley? So I want to. What atlas? What page number? 70 something? Wow, we have memorized. You're good. Yes. 78. So let's just get oriented here. Page 78, you'll hear spread.
The centerfold.
Centerfold, as it were. I think you revealed too much about yourself there. Okay, so you see on the delta, on the Egyptian delta, you see in bold print Ramses. That's a site that we do identify. We have discovered ancient Ramses, a city that the book of Exodus says the Hebrew slaves helped build. And then you see a thin line that is drawn like about 4 o'clock from Ramses down. It crosses just south on their map from the Little Bitter Lake. That's a conjecture. That area right now is where the Suez Canal was built because it was low-lying and marshy, and there was lots of bodies of water there. Then there are roads at the top of the page along the Great Sea. You'll see a black line that says the way to the land of the Philistines. Okay, that is called the King's Highway, or the way of the Philistines. And in back last lesson, we were told Moses did not go there lest in meeting soldiers and forts they lose heart. And so instead of going the direct route, they went in through the wilderness, and they cross over, and then you see a hyphenated line that says possible northern route. Because, again, we don't know where Mount Sinai is. Scholars have conjectured that, so you see if you find a town called Azmon, A-Z-M-O-N, and you'll see below it, in little tiny italics, you'll see Mount Sinai, Horeb, Jebel Hilal. There are different theories as to where Sinai was. I just pointed out to you, because we don't know where Sinai was, there are various mountains that are proposed. The dominant one, the Sinai of Christian tradition, is in the south, at the point where the Sinai Peninsula comes to a point. North of that, you'll see Mount Sinai, Horeb, Jebel Musa. So that's if you take a tour to the Middle East, that is the site that's been pointed out as Sinai for, 15, 16 centuries, okay? But it's a Christian site in the sense that Christians identified it, and there's a monastery there, and it's a beautiful, and it's a stunning place to visit. Huh? There is a theory, I don't see it reflected in your map, there is a theory that Sinai is actually in the Arabian desert, because when God appears, the mountain it rocks, and there's thunders, and there's fire, which makes people think of volcano. There's no active volcano in the Sinai desert, but there are some in the Arabian desert. Again, the main point is these are not firm. We are not able to identify for sure. And for some people, that's a loss. But again, if you get a chance to go to Sinai, it's not the safest place right now to go. But it is because again, for 15, 16 centuries, Christians have gone there. And this has been where they identified Moses' actions. Yes?
This all seems, the track and everything seems like really important to me.
Because you're an engineer.
Right. The Jewish people, do they attach a lot of importance?
Not so much. Not so much. Not really. It's a Christian site. I'm not saying that Jews never have, but there's, Muslims do. Muslims do, and Christians do. When I was in Israel as a student, Israel owned the peninsula, and at the end of my time, they gave it back to Egypt, and there was a great flood of Jews wanting to see it. It was a funny thing because the monks blocked the doors because it was just people were like rude, like ugly American tourists. That's what it was, and so it was kind of in the news that the Israelis broke into the monastery because they only had like a month before the state of Israel handed it back to Egypt. So Jews do not commemorate the spot that way.